Navigating election season in the workplace is challenging, but with the right strategies, internal communicators can turn each potentially divisive development into an opportunity to strengthen employee trust and engagement. Today, I'm joined by Anne Mellinger, CEO of Brilliant Inc., and Jeff Corbin, Principal Strategy Advisor at Staffbase. They'll equip you with practical strategies to confidently manage political conversations and offer insights into how you can refine your internal comms strategies and promote a respectful environment during election season. And now I'm happy to turn things over to Anne and Jeff.
Thanks so much, John. Appreciate it. How ironic that we were talking moments ago about how hard it is to pronounce my last name. Sorry, I jinxed you, I think, on that. But I am, as John said, I'm Anne Mellinger. I am the CEO of Brilliant Inc. Brilliant Inc. is an internal communications agency. We have been around since 2008. And I am really excited to be a part of this conversation today, partly from my position as leading Brilliant Inc. and advising clients on this very topic. Also, my college career began with studying policy studies, and so all of this is very near and dear to me as well. And of course, I love anytime I get to engage in a heated dialogue with Jeff Corbin. So this will be fun. Buckle up, right, Jeff?
I hope you are buckled up, and it's great to be chatting with you again. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, especially to the person, Leanne, who's calling in from London. I'm Jeff Corbin. I'm Principal Strategic Advisor at Staffbase. For those of you not familiar with us at Staffbase, we're an employee communications platform, mobile employee app, intranet solution, email, digital signage, all of your communications channels in one easy to use platform. Just a little bit about my background. I have been in the communications industry for the better part of my career. I used to be the CEO of a PR corporate communications consulting firm called KCSA Strategic Communications, where I specialized in employee communications, other areas of corporate communications. And then towards the latter part of my CEO-ship, I guess is what you would call it, I started a mobile app technology company for employee communications that actually was a competitor to Staffbase on the employee app product side. That's how I got to know Staffbase as a competitor. And when eventually the PR firm sold the employee app, and then Staffbase approached me to join them. And this was a little over 4 years ago, and been consulting with our largest of enterprise customers, helping them to think about how to put a new employee communications platform to use successfully. So it's a little bit about my background. I've been in this industry. Anne, you and I have known each other for quite some time now. This topic, when I was asked to join this webinar, I was like, wow, do they really want to know what I think about politics? And I was told that that's not appropriate, that I should keep it to myself.
Not today. Not today.
But I think there's a lot to talk about here, and a lot of opinions, a lot of emotions that are flying with 3 weeks left before the election. And there's definitely, we all kind of know what the right thing to do is. The question is, what do we do with like some of these sensitive topics? But before we get into that, which I think is why probably everyone who's joined is, how do we deal with the tough topics? Maybe we should talk about some of the things that make common sense, that are common sense. So, and like, what are you currently, how are you advising your customers on what to do or not to do in the coming weeks, or even after the election?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing is that it's not too late. It is right around the corner, but it's also not too late to sit down and actually think about this. Unfortunately, we're all really busy. We may not have this top of mind, front and center. And so the most important thing is to actually sit down and sit with leadership and think about, where do we fall on the spectrum of all the different ways that we can react and respond to what's happening out in the world. We can do anything from saying absolutely nothing to saying what we believe and who you should be voting for and who our employees should be voting for. And really try to gauge from leadership, where do we fall within this spectrum? You have to sit down and have the conversation and open it up and really ask and talk about the pros and cons of each. You know, we have examples on both ends of the spectrum. We've seen organizations that have said, we're not going to say anything. It's not for the workplace. No one cares what we think as leaders. We're not going to have it here. And there's some pretty negative ramifications that can come with that, to others where, you know, we're going to make it very clear what we think and what we believe, and we're going to put it out there. And obviously there are big risks that can come with that. So it's important to really sit down and ask the question and look in the mirror and say, what do we want? What is appropriate for our culture? What is appropriate for our values? And ultimately leadership has to decide that. But I believe that it's communications job to sit down and ask that question. Now, if you haven't already, now is the day. Do it today, do it tomorrow. It needs to happen quickly.
Yeah, you know, one thought that I have, you know, depending upon who wins, it's going to present a crisis for the other, right? Like it's so extreme,
Yeah.
kind of, unfortunately, that, you know, if Trump wins, okay, it's going to have ramifications for maybe certain industries. If Kamala wins, it'll have different ramifications. And, you know, I kind of view this no differently than, you know, any other crisis, and preparing for any other crisis, whether it gets that level of quote unquote crisis is to be seen, but, you know, at least to become prepared. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it is really about, and I love this. Laura just put in the chat that it's not just about up until election day. It's actually after. My son, who's a high school junior right now, is taking a class on elections, which I'm so happy about, and met his teacher last week. And she said, you know what, folks, no matter what, you've got to keep in mind, this election is not over the day after. And that is absolutely true. I mean, if last election taught us anything, it's to expect the unexpected and be prepared for what might happen well after the election. So I think really thinking about what is it that we want to say leading up to, what is our message to employees on the day of, whether it's, you know, get out and vote or volunteer or whatever, but then also being prepared for those disruptions that could come after, I think is really important. And, you know, it's so interesting, Jeff, when you talk about this idea of like polarization, because I think that is what has really shifted so much. If we think back to, you know, 2020, 2021, that's really when the trend became companies have to say something. You can no longer stay silent on political issues, whether it's about race, violence, you know, any host of topics, those needed to be addressed. And what's happening now, the shift that we're seeing in higher education and in corporate America is like, ooh, actually, we're just better off saying nothing. You know, let's just not say a word. And so unfortunately, it's because it is so polarized. And unfortunately, there's not one good answer. It really is an art of like looking at that and saying, you know, where have we fallen in the past on this spectrum, and what do we think is the right thing going forward?
Yeah, and I think, you know, if we think back to when Roe v. Wade was overturned, I mean, this is one of these lightning rod topics.
Yep.
You know, many companies, the day that the decision was released, I think it was inadvertently released, you know, companies were scurrying to come up with, what do we need to say? We have to say something. And
exactly,
it's the same thing here, you know, and, you know, one way or the other, there's going to be implications to whoever wins. You know, we were talking about this yesterday, and, you know, depending upon the industry that a company is in, you know, the election is going to have an impact on the employees of the company in the respective industry. So for example, if it's an oil and gas company, okay, a Trump win has different implications than a Kamala wins. The construction industry, how, you know, which candidate is investing in infrastructure, which obviously would put more money into companies that are in the construction industry. You know, what about government? I think isn't the U.S. government the largest employer in the United States? So there's a lot of people who are going to be affected by this. And so this is where, okay, what is our plan one way or the other? And what are the communications? And also I think, how do we engage with our leadership and get them to realize that? I agree with you. I don't think there's saying nothing is an answer,
Yep.
it's so, what do you think about, like, how should the folks that are listening in, how might they think about dealing with their leadership, especially those who are reluctant to say anything?
To say anything. Yeah, I mean, I think it is, again, it's our responsibility as communications to sit down with leaders and really ask them, okay, what is it that feels most important to you and also most important to our people? You need to really understand where your people are. There are plenty of organizations out there that have a very politically aligned, employee makeup, and it's also much more common to have completely disparate opinions. And so I think one of the biggest things is thinking about what are your policies right now. Sit down and look back at what are your policies around social media posts. What are your policies around engaging in political discourse on your company channels? Go back, look at those policies. Those are one piece of information that should guide your plan right now. Another piece of information that should guide your plan are your values. What are your company values, and how can those really ground you in what you want to do going forward? So your policies, your values, and then also really knowing your people and understanding, is this an organization where people do generally want to engage in these kinds of conversations, or is this a place where we don't have a lot of dialogue happening within our organization? And really look at those things to determine what is the right approach along this spectrum for our organization. But you really do have to think about all of those things. I mean, when you look at your policy, it's like, what's our policy around wearing political attire to work or on Zoom? What's our policy around Zoom backgrounds? What's our policy around posting on social media? What are the different considerations that need to come into this? I think policy can go a long way in helping to just get everybody ready for what's coming. I think the most important thing is to really, let's just acknowledge, like, something really big is coming, y'all. Let's be ready. It's big. It's not just one day. It's one day is going to have a big outcome, but the time that follows is also going to be really important. And let's think about how do we allow our policies and our values to guide us? I don't know if you have thoughts on any specific policies that people should be thinking about, Jeff, at this time.
I mean, I think when it comes down to, when I think of what a company should be considering, there's three underlying principles that at least guide my thinking process here. One is leadership, and do we, how is our company, how is our leadership, taking a stance? We know from the Edelman trust barometer that employees trust their employers more than anyone else. So, that's where the leadership concept comes into play. I think there's this principle of decency and respect, and that's a hard one because, people have strong opinions, and but at the end of the day, I think it's we should be remaining decent and respectful to each other. And then the third thing that I think about is this concept of democracy, not so much in the political sense of what's going on now about democracy, but just like the importance of having a say and voting and getting out there and encouraging people to vote, because everyone wants to have an opinion, especially, whether it's regarding, health benefits or, things that, taxes, the way that we can make a difference is by getting out there and voting. So, those are three areas that I think are really important, in developing a plan. Say, to ask yourself the question, how are we dealing with this concept of leadership? What do we want to do, and then like how are we approaching it, and what is our stance on remaining respectful to each other, and making that point, because that comes down to probably a value that most companies have. And then
I
also
think
get out and
that's,
vote, like do your civic duty. Like,
yeah.
if you want to have an opinion, you want to have to say, regardless of what it is, get out and vote. Even though some people may not want you to.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. I mean, the get out and vote message has always been the one that's like that's the easy win, right? Like if your leadership doesn't want to say anything, if they feel like we can't do anything, like at least the get out and vote, take your civic duty. Some states require companies to give this time off. So like know what the policies are and where your company is based. But definitely that's a big one. But I think I want to go back to this point that you made, Jeff, about civility, because I think that's such a big part of it. And it goes back to the how vastly divided our country is right now. And a lot of it is just acknowledging it and acknowledging how important civility is in the workplace, that our values, require us to be, compel us to be respectful, to engage in respectful ways. I think what's really hard, like we can all agree that civil discourse is a really important thing. I think what's really difficult is like the people that are going to be responsible for that are managers. And I mean, I don't know about you, but as a manager, I never got training of like how to encourage respectful political discourse among my teammates. Like that is really complex work that most managers aren't equipped to do. And so I think really thinking about that, like it's those are the people. We can do as much as we can from a communications perspective and a senior leadership perspective, but it's the managers at the front lines that are going to be the ones that really have to encourage that respectful civil discourse. And I think Laura in the chat is sharing like some of the toolkit, the FAQs, things like that. If there are trainings that you can offer, I think that's really, really helpful as well.
I love what Victoria put into the chat about the fact that they pulled together a fireside chat with their CEO. I think that is so proactive,
Yes.
and such a, and obviously it says something about your CEO being willing to put him or herself in that sort of situation. I mean, one of the things that I can't help but think about is some really large companies like Tesla. Let's think about who their CEO is, right? Like Elon Musk. I wouldn't suggest putting Elon Musk in a fireside chat in front of the employees, but there are, we have these situations where the CEOs are, very, very outspoken. Maybe there are major contributors to one of the campaigns. Employees know there are lists of who the CEOs are who are making major contributions to the various campaigns. And that, so how do you deal with that where you have a CEO who is obviously pro one candidate? What does the company do about that?
Yeah. I mean,
that could anger some employees.
absolutely, absolutely. And if you look at the research that's out there, it's pretty all over the place. Like there are studies that show that some vast majority, like 70% of employees don't want politics in the workplace, but also 70% of employees want to know where their CEOs stand on major political topics. So it's a complete mess out there, and there's not a clear answer, which is why it's so important that we're just like having a conversation, and getting these ideas from the chat are so helpful too, because unfortunately with this stuff, it's not a science. There's not one right way to do it. It is a bit of an art, and you really do have to do what's right from your organization. I also love the example that Victoria shared, because I think it's that kind of, you have to have some sort of perspective and wherewithal to say like, and one perspective is we're not going to do any of this. We're just none of it. It's all outside of the workforce. We're not creating space for it. We're not having a fireside chat about it. It's not here. Another perspective is to just acknowledge that it is out there, that it's out there. Let's acknowledge that there's tons of divisiveness. Let's acknowledge that there's a lack of respect. Let's acknowledge that there are people standing on two sides of a fence yelling at each other, and we don't particularly want that. We want to create spaces where we can have respectful conversation, and to really do that. I mean, I like this idea of watch parties to discuss it. That's in the chat right now. It gets a little bit dicey. I think, I remember after the 2016 elections, the morning after, I was in San Francisco and I went to a client office, and it was really interesting to walk in there, and people, I mean, it was San Francisco. It's 2016. So you can imagine what the energy was like in the office. And, they had some really nice, they had spaces that were dedicated to let's come together and have discussion. These are, dedicated physical spaces. You can obviously have that too in a virtual workplace as well. You can have these dedicated spaces for people to be able to come together, have some guardrails around it. This is what it's for. It's just meant to be to support one another. It's not meant for one person to yell at another, but it's meant for us to be supportive and to create spaces where we can have respectful discourse.
Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting to see how things play out leading up to. I'm really more concerned about the day after, and planning for the day after. What do you think?
Yeah, and somebody mentioned that as well. The concerns around post-election violence, they're very real. I mean, I remember last year we were in January, or we were at a particularly very busy moment with my company, and we had meetings and things were going on, and I just was like, wait, like we can't just have business as usual right now. There's something really scary happening. We've got to just stop. And I think that's the thing I think for us all to be considering right now is, are we going to be able to have business as usual the day after, the few weeks after? To some extent we have to, of course. We function in a capitalist society. We have to keep having business as usual, but we've got to find ways to build in that flexibility and that the opportunity to flex and to create. We might need to do a town hall. We might need to we might need to cancel whatever big thing that we have coming up and dedicate it to something different. I think you can't plan for what's going to happen, but you can plan for something to happen, and that's probably the most important thing. I'm curious too, if people want to continue to share in the chat, like what sorts of things are you doing at your organizations to prepare for what comes after? Because again, I think we are better off preparing for the worst, even if we don't know exactly what that's going to be.
I think just like on a practical level, something to think about, and I'm good friends with a CEO of a very large company here in North America, and I was just chatting with him one day about like what are his expectations with regard to the information that his communications professionals are providing him. And what he said to me was, I expect my comms professionals, particularly my employee comms professionals, to be my eyes and ears at the water cooler and to tell me what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and to help guide me in my thinking. I'll eventually make that decision as to what I want to do or don't want to do, but I can't make the right decision unless I have the information. So I guess the message that what resonated with me about that is it was not in the context of the election. It was just in general. But when you apply it to what's going on now, to be out there and to talk to your people and really like this isn't, it needs to be somewhat of a grassroots effort, because we want to be sensitive to what's keeping them awake at night. What are their concerns? And then how do we respond to those feelings so that when something goes either way, that, we have a response that makes them feel good, that gives them what they're asking for, what they need. So, I thought that was really, really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about knowing where your people are. And certainly internal comms is better equipped to do that than really any other part of the organization. And so really helping leadership to understand, here's where our people are at. Look, they're exhausted. They don't want to talk about it. They just want some peace and quiet. Or they're really concerned about how this, particular piece of legislation that's on the ballot is going to impact our ability to deliver our products to clients. So whatever it is really important for you to tune into where are your people, look at some of the data, ask the questions, see where they are, and make sure that whatever you're planning is really tailored around their reality and what they're experiencing day in and day out.
Yeah, totally. Someone also mentioned to me, if we think about some of the celebrities that are out there talking on the subject, and how they are kind of exemplifying leadership, Taylor Swift How cool is she? You know, whether you agree with her politics, you know, who she's in favor of, you know, basically she came out and she said it's okay to say who you're for and what topics are important to you, but then also say and encourage others to do their own research and to make sure again that they get out and vote, but that it's really up to them. But I think there's nothing wrong with, you know, arguing your points. Patrick
Yeah.
Mahomes, just to stay on the Taylor Swift Kansas City Chiefs bandwagon, you know, he basically came out and said that he's not going to endorse anyone in this league because he's not trying to sway anyone's opinion. And I just think that, you know, that's that semblance of leadership and being honest it really resonates with me.
Yeah, absolutely. It can also backfire. And I'm curious, again, in the chat, I would love to hear from folks like, have you seen where that can backfire? You know, have you seen in your own organization, like Jeff gave the example earlier, I mean, we can say what we want, but leaders are going to just go out and do what leaders do. And sometimes we have to deal with the backlash of that, of what might come. Someone might, you know, or for them to be scrutinized on where are you making your donations? A lot of this is dependent upon what kind of organization you're in. Is it a large public company where certain, you know, disclosures are publicly available versus, you know, smaller family owned shops? But I'm curious how people are dealing with that. You know, how do you keep leaders in line and deal with the fallout when they don't do what you hope that they would do, or when you hope that they would stay neutral on something and they didn't? I'm really curious to hear how that's playing out for folks.
You know, that's when the crisis begins, and having that crisis plan, and that's why I think it's definitely, it would definitely be a good use of everyone's time to outline, well, in the case of a CEO or a leader that's out there saying things that others might disagree with, to, you know, okay, how are we going to address that? That's one scenario. But, you know, to have, I think someone in the chat talked about having an FAQ, like what happens if, you know, such and such, you know, Trump or Kamala is elected and the implications of that on our business, to have those answers prepared. You know, how is this going to affect our jobs? How does this affect what we're doing and the future of our company? So, you know, one question that I've heard, you know, some companies have put into place like political action committees within their organizations. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had a number of conversations about this, about political action committees in the workplace. And certainly, I mean, especially in very large organizations, the employees have the ability to, you know, it's a big voting block, a lot of power. And, you know, again, for some, it depends a lot on your organization. Does your organization do something that is, you know, that is highly regulated, that is impacted by different regulations and legislation that's out there? And in that case, you may have, you know, already systems in place where you enable that to happen. I think employee resource groups are another great resource for understanding, you know, where are our people on the political spectrum? How involved do they want to be? Are they looking for an outlet to be more active on certain topics? And do we as leaders want to provide them that? So much of it is culture specific and organization specific. It's impossible to say, you know, there's any one right way to do it. You bring in the union piece and that makes it even more complicated.
Right.
I think that, you know, when you've got a unionized organization, it becomes even more tricky with what kind of political talk you're going to have.
Yeah, you know, so Victoria just posted in the chat, you know, people underestimating the impact that social media posts have. I mean, I have my LinkedIn, I have my Twitter, I have my Instagram. It's mine, right? And it's really not up to my company to tell me what to say, what not to say, although I probably want to be mindful of what I am saying, because, you know, that I know that my employer is paying attention to, possibly paying attention, and doesn't want me saying anything that could upset coworkers or, you know, the business. How do we deal with this? How do we deal with the fact that each person's social media is their own?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to your, to your policies is really, really important. You've got to remind employees what your social media policy is, what you're allowed, what you're encouraging people to say, what you're not wanting people to say, things like that, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, and I was just some weird things coming through the chat that I'm seeing, but someone was saying that that the companies have their own policies with regard to what employees say. I think it's just one of these things where people have to be smart what they say, what they don't say, right?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. For sure.
Well, I wanted to jump in real quick. We had a couple of questions come in. So I thought we'd ask a couple of those, but to everybody listening, if you have a question for Ann and Jeff, please use that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions. Now is your time to submit those and get your questions answered. First one here, though, can you offer up a few tactical things to do in advance of November 5th?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what I was saying. If nothing else, at a bare minimum, if you do nothing else, please send a message out to employees reminding them of what your policies are around political conversation in the workplace. Go get them out, refresh them, look at them, remind people on that. That's like at a bare minimum. If your leadership doesn't want to do anything or say anything, at least just say, look, something's coming. We got to be ready. We got to make sure we're staying out ahead of this. Like, let's just remind people what the policies are. That's the basic. I think the going a step further would be for leadership to proactively communicate to employees, like, look, this is from a values perspective. This is what we believe. This is what we believe about civil discourse and respect and taking advantage of our rights and responsibilities in a democracy. I think that's the next level, and then, going even a step further of not just pushing communications out, but actually creating safe spaces and places for dialogue and creating those opportunities for dialogue. I think it's kind of like start from the bare minimum and layer on from there in terms of what you're able to do. I don't know, Jeff, if you have anything.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with everything you just said. Just to reiterate, I think saying nothing, not doing anything is probably not the best idea. Even if it's just to come out and say, we have something really important happening. We acknowledge what's going on. We acknowledge everyone's right to have their own opinion. And we as an organization just want to encourage decency and respect for each other. I think that statement says a lot about, the values and who we are, who you are as a company.
Absolutely.
Next question. Our leadership wants to stay away from discussing anything to do with the election. What can I say or tell them that maybe make them change their mind, since I feel that we have an obligation to put something out there?
Jeff, you wanna take a crack at this one first?
Well, I think that the best way to approach it is to use some examples of where it can go wrong, right? And I mentioned before Elon Musk, people know what's going on. They know what their company stands for, and what could happen by not saying anything is probably more dangerous than saying something that is pretty even. So
I would say just like a counterpoint to that, though, is that it is okay to say nothing, but say why you're saying nothing, So if that's your choice, you need to make sure that it's a conscious decision. My conscious decision for my organization is that I'm not going to say anything. I don't want to, but then I need to explain why, because that can actually go a long way. As a leader, as a CEO, I have my own, personal political views, and I don't feel that they, should impact anyone else. My view as the leader of this company is that we need to be respectful. We need to relate to each other as individuals, and we need to act on our political duty to vote. And that's still saying something without saying something, so I think that's the real balance. If you don't want to say anything, anything that is saying who you're going to vote for, that's fine, but then explain why.
I agree.
Do you have any guidance for employees who must interact with the public every day as part of their jobs?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, like, do what you can to protect your mental well-being, because that's hard. The more you're out there talking to folks, the harder it is. But I think just really, again, understanding and having those talking points and things prepared ahead of time that align with who your organization is, and having that sort of like planned out and prepared for you as much as possible, so that when you are out speaking publicly, you have those talking points, you have that messaging. It's such like a classic thing of communications, is to have like a messaging document. It sounds so basic, but that's the purpose of it, is so that when you are out there having these really tough conversations and you don't know what's going to come up, you have something that you can go back to ground you, of like, this is what I believe, or this is what my organization believes, this is how we feel. Having that pre-written, pre-prepared, not statements, because we're not out there to be robots, but having those pre-prepared talking points can really go a long way.
And it's also, I think, knowing where you are. I was, when people were introducing where they're from, there are a bunch of people from the States here that are these more, call it swing states, and when you're traveling, you have to be sensitive to that. Every state has different cultures and demographics, and so you want to be able to have, as a salesperson, as someone who's on the front line with customers, you want to start to have relationships with them. And what's going on in politics is part of the day-to-day. And so how do you have that conversation without saying too much or saying the wrong thing, and then preparing yourself for that, and to be sensitive to the issues that are out there that people care about.
And so much of it is about acknowledging that so much of it is just about acknowledging it, that it's distracting, that it's potentially upsetting, that it's potentially, it gets us all riled up. I mean, that is what so much of it that employees want, is to let's just acknowledge it. Let's just acknowledge that this is tough. Let's just acknowledge this is a hard moment. It's a scary moment. So often that's all people want, is some acknowledgement. They can often more easily get back to business as usual when there is at least acknowledgement that there are some big, scary things happening. To Megan's question in the chat about creating safe space for dialogue in the workplace, I mean, that's going to look different at different workplaces. A leadership facilitated dialogue about the election may not be right for many organizations that are out there. It may be right for yours. It really depends a lot on your leadership and how comfortable they are. But when I think about spaces like that, I think it's often either just saying, like, there is this physical or virtual space where people can come and talk. It may not be moderated at all. It may just be literally, it's there as a space. It may make sense to have, have look at look to your employee resource groups, encourage them. Can they do something? Can they host a space or a lunch or a coffee talk? I think really looking to your people to have those conversations happen from a grassroots level is really important. Leadership and communications don't necessarily have to do it or be involved, but rather to create the space for it. I don't know, Jeff, what your thought?
Yeah, well, for me, when I think of the space, it's kind of like when at Staffbase, our CEO is very active through our own platform, communications platform, of answering questions and also doing monthly videos where he approaches the entire company globally, and he will touch on sensitive topics. And that, to me, is when he says, we're about to go through something that's pretty important, and let's just have respect and be sensitive to everyone's feelings and opinions. That, to me, in my mind is the space that he is referring to. That gives me the comfort to know that, okay, someone cares about how I feel. Someone cares about how my colleague feels. And maybe as a result of that, I'm going to behave differently. So it's the messaging that creates a mental safe space, which is as important as, okay, when we're in the cafeteria together or in, a break room, that, we should be, this is a safe space.
I'm just pointing out to the audience, Anne put in the chat, how are others creating these kinds of spaces? So if you could just put in the chat, how your organization is dealing with that, that'd be great.
Always good to crowdsource.
Yes.
I love crowdsourcing solutions. Let's help each other, y'all.
While we wait for responses to come in, let's go on to the next question. How can we prepare for any political drama or unrest following the election?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit. I think it is just a lot of it is just awareness. I mean, I think again, like for me in my visiting my son's class and his teacher said that, it was a big aha for me of like, oh, you're right. It's not business as usual on November 6th. Like it is really going to be having, so just at least, but at the very minimum, have awareness that this probably is not going to be over when it's over, and think back to those times when we thought that it was and how disruptive it was to go back to work, and instead of getting back to business as usual, we're talking about hanging chads, like all of those things. Obviously we're well past those days now, but you never know what it's going to be. And so just at least preparing for something, being aware that something may happen and that things are not going to go back to normal the day this is over is really important awareness to have.
Agree.
Any advice for how to manage a culture that includes vastly different political viewpoints?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. Look, my company is pretty small and we're pretty aligned politically. So I don't have to deal with these kinds of things in my day in and day out. But I know lots of organizations, especially large, complex ones, especially ones that have, we might have our headquarters in the Bay Area and a manufacturing site in the Midwest, and, employees in those different places have vastly different perspectives. This is not something that can be solved in 4 weeks. This is something that you have to really take a long, hard look at the mirror and say, are we creating a culture that enables our people to have respectful discourse, even when they are on completely different ends of the spectrum? What are the different systems and policies and processes and spaces that we've created as an organization to allow people to engage and respect one another, even when they're at various ends of the spectrum? It's not something that's going to be fixed with like a communication here and a communication there. That's really zooming out and looking at your overall culture, your values, and are you creating spaces for people to be able to disagree? And I think I agree wholeheartedly with what Chris said of like, it's about the values. It is about our company values. It's about finding the things that we all agree on, no matter where we are on the political spectrum. And again, like, let's refuse to let the world wants us to be on one side or another. There is no in between. That is what the world is telling us. You got to pick a side. You cannot be in the middle. And like, let's as an organization say, we're not giving into that. What is true for us is our values, and that's what matters, and that's the baseline, regardless of everything else.
And
yes.
Why not also use the next few weeks as an opportunity to reinforce values and reinforce what we stand for? It's not so often that we know that we have potential lightning rod issues presenting themselves. So why not go out there now and say, 3 weeks to go, get out and vote. But at the same time, let's remember what we stand for as a company. And
Absolutely.
that can help a lot. And I know from my perspective, our CEO does that sort of thing all the time. It gives me comfort. It makes me also feel good about the company that I work for. So.
And I love this example that that Victoria shared about these living room conversations. This is amazing. And these are the kinds of things that signal to your organization what kind of culture we have. This is what really signals so much more than sending out an email and saying, let's all be respectful, but actually creating time, creating space, creating these forums, enabling people to do it. That is what really will go a long way in terms of like shifting the culture.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to kind of what I had said earlier in the very beginning, which is I think we all know that this is important and that we should be doing these things. So, with a webinar like this, it just reinforces the fact that we got to do it, right? It's easy to think about it, but now we have time to actually execute and to go to our leadership. Go get, if you're in an office, walk outside and go to your CEO's office and say, listen, I think we need to do something here. That's where we as internal communications professionals, I think we want to be, right? Is just informing, advising our leadership and engendering that sort of respect.
Next question is, what's one common mistake you see companies make when it comes to political communication?
I think the most common is like just literally not doing anything. So I think just by the fact that all of you are here on this webinar today, you're thinking about it, kudos to you. Like you're already not making that mistake. Like just think about it. Just at least have it on your radar. It's coming, it's happening, and we need to do something. And, of course, thinking longer term, doing some of these bigger picture things like creating opportunities for civil discourse within your organization. Yes. But, just do something. Not doing anything is definitely the biggest mistake. I don't know, Jeff, if you agree with
Yeah,
that.
no, all I would say is I'm looking at what Melissa just put in the chat, and everyone, great idea tomorrow or today, prepare that communication tomorrow, put
Yep.
it out, and
Yep.
it's good that will you'll reap the benefits of that tremendously, I can assure you.
Yep.
Nice comment, Melissa, thank you.
I've run out of questions right now, but if the audience has any more questions, feel free to put it in that Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Ann and Jeff, did you want to speak to some of these other messages that came through in the chat?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I like the idea. Again, I think the most common thing when you look out there and ask people for advice on what to do, the number one piece of advice is to endorse voting and not candidates. That is just a very, very easy one. That's the low-hanging fruit. Definitely go for that. Casey just asked a question about dealing with misinformation. I mean, that is by far the biggest thing that is changing in the landscape and is going to continue to change, with recognizing that a lot of what's out there that you might be seeing may or may not be real. And this goes back to, again, how are you equipping your organization to function in the new world of AI, and understanding that you've got to you can't take everything that you see and read at face value. You do have to question what's happening, and really, again, educating your people around misinformation, about questioning what's seeing. Kathy's asked a question about, doing nothing. Are there examples of leadership of leaders? Are there examples of organizations that have done or said nothing that have gone wrong? I mean, absolutely. I mean, I'd love to hear from others in the chat if they have examples from when their own companies have done nothing. The fact of the matter is, people want their organizations, whether it's around the election or not, people want their organizations to recognize that they're humans, what they're going through, right? That's just like a basic thing. And if you don't say anything, you're not recognizing the fact that I, as an employee, am living and walking around in this world where everything seems out of control. And so at the very least, we've got to address and acknowledge that something big is happening, change is afoot. This is very contentious. It's the most contentious election of any of our lifetimes. Like, if you don't say anything, then you're just completely ignoring my day-to-day reality as a human living in the United States of America. And so that for me is why doing nothing. It's just a complete disconnect from me as an employee and how I'm able to show up every day.
And I think that goes, well, I think it goes back again to the Edelman Trust Barometer, and employees want to hear from their companies. Okay. So you're right. You have a choice not to say anything, but you should know that your employees, to the extent that you have something to say, they want to hear it, even just to give them comfort, to know that we have values, that we stand for something, regardless of the event at hand. And, I think that's really what it comes down to. It's not so much don't do anything, that, doing nothing is wrong, but, with any major event in the world, the employees want to hear from their employers. End of story. So you just use it as an opportunity, as I mentioned before, to reinforce values and principles and what you stand for as an organization. That in and of itself is going to go a long way.
Yeah. And I love what Laurent said about just addressing our own and protecting our own well-being, and acknowledgement can go a long way. Alyssa, yes, acknowledgement can go a long way. And it's true, like that, just acknowledging that this is a scary time. It's an overwhelming time. It's a distracting time. For some of it's an upsetting time. That's something we can all relate to. And again, whether or not you're happy with the outcome of the election or not, we can all relate to, well, I might have been really upset today if it had gone the other way. And you know what? Let me try to think about how that person down the hall might be feeling. I think just acknowledging that, people want to know that they're not alone. They want to feel seen. They want to feel cared for. And, that doesn't mean you have to care about their political identity. You have to care about the fact that they're a human existing in the United States of America right now.
Totally right.
Well, if there's no other questions, Anne, Jeff, did you want to do some final thoughts to wrap things up?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said it a number of times, and I'll say it again, like, this is an art. It's not a science. This is very complex stuff. I kudos to Reagan for hosting this conversation, because it is complex and we need all of these ideas. We need to have discussion and dialogue as a community of communicators to help each other, because there isn't just like, do this, do this, do this. There's no formula. It's an art, and we have to help each other. Definitely get together with your colleagues at, similar companies, ask them what they're doing, share what you're doing, modify each other's, like, if you've got a toolkit, share it with your friend down at their company. Like, definitely we need to do that. And I think, again, like I said, at a bare minimum, look at your policies, refresh your population on what they are, remind people this is what respect at our organization looks like and means. This is how we're able to use our channels. And at the core, it should all go back to your values. Everything should tie back to your organizational values. That should be your guide in everything that you're doing right now. It's hard work. Let's definitely help each other.
Yeah. And I would just conclude by saying, leadership, decency and respect, and get out and vote. Those are really important things, and we all know deep down how to address these challenging times. This is, even though it's not a crisis, we should treat it in the same way and plan appropriately. And then everything Anne said.
Prepare for the worst, right? And hope for the best.
Exactly. And hope for the
Prepare
best.
for the worst.
And it'll all be fine. It has to be, right?
Whatever it is, we're going to keep going, because that's what we do as communicators. We take what it is and we're just going to keep going. So
this is an opportunity, though, for us to, insert ourselves into something that is very, very important. So consider it an opportunity.
Well, that brings our time together today to a close. As a reminder to our audience, you will receive today's materials and a survey within 24 to 48 hours. Please take 2 minutes to fill out that survey and help us program future events. On behalf of Reagan Communications and Staffbase, thank you for attending today's session, and have a great rest of your day.